Hey guys, BrandonioProductions here, and welcome to part 10 of making Snake in Java. Now in parts 1 through 9, as you can see, as I do in all the videos, we have actually made a working Snake game that contains pretty much all of the logic, all of the graphics, every functionality that you would look for inside of a Snake game. There's only a few things that are actually missing. And those two things, well actually there's only a couple things that are actually missing from the game. And those two things are going to be covered now, in part 10. What are these two things? Well, the first thing that we actually need to add are win conditions. So currently, in this Snake game, you're just going to have to keep going until you lose, and there's actually no way to actually win. Well, in part 10 we're going to add a win condition, and in Snake, you win by filling the entire playable area with your snake. Now the second thing we need to do is we actually need to add an end of game screen. So this is something that appears when the game is over, that displays your score and detailed stats about your game, let's say. Or we may not do detailed stats, but it needs to be improved over this what we have right now, where you simply crash into a wall and then it resets you. So let's go ahead and test this out, or let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a win what's the word I'm looking for? A win event, I suppose. So when your snake fills the entire playable field, that is when you have successfully beat the snake game. So how do we end up testing this? Well, there are a couple ways we can do it. As you know, the snake is currently stored inside of a linked list. Now what we can do is we can actually scroll through each individual point on the linked list, and then we can confirm that it's in a box, and once we have all of the points, we can just make sure that all of the boxes are filled. Now that is actually a tedious way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, since the linked list only contains points of where the snake is, if there are the same amount of points of the snake that there are boxes on the actual grid, then we can assume that the snake is actually filling the entire box, because if the snake were to collide with itself, or 2 points were to exist at the same point, then the user would actually lose. So what we can do is we can just make sure that the linked list points contains, or the snake points, simply contains the same amount of points that are actually found within the grid. So this can be done inside of the move method, which is called every so often, and it contains all of the grids, or all of the snake's logic. So as you can see inside the move method, the first thing we do is we actually determine the direction, and then we move the snake, and then we go ahead and check to see if the snake collided with fruit. If they didn't, then we check to see if they went out of bounds, then we check to see if they went out of bounds again, and then we check to see if they ran into themselves. So now, after we check all of those conditions, we can go ahead and check to see if the person actually won. So now we can say else if snake.size. Now keep in mind, snake.size is synonymous with the amount of points that are actually stored within the linked list variable. So we have else if snake.size equals, so now we need to calculate how many points are actually on the grid. Luckily we have a variable that contains the grid width and the grid height, so the number of boxes within the width and the number of boxes within the height. So classically, to get the entire number of boxes, we're going to need to find the area. So we can do this by multiplying the width times the height. So we're just going to say equals grid width times grid height. And then we're just going to open curly brackets. So if this is the case where the snake is filling the entire playable area, then we won. So now what we need to do is we need to tell the user that we actually won. And this is something that we need to do with the endgame screen. So we're going to have two versions of the endgame screen. We're going to have the version that displays the fact that you lost and then your current score. And then we're going to have the version that says you won and then your current score. So let's go ahead and work on that endgame screen now. So, as you can see, every time we lose and every time the game needs to be reset, what we do is we call the generate default snake method. So before we actually call the generate default snake method, we want something to pop up just like the startup menu that pops up and says you lost, press a certain key to restart yourself. So let's go ahead and work on that now. So we're actually going to create a new variable just like the isInMenu variable, and we're going to call it private boolean is@endgame, and that's going to be equal to false to begin with. So now we have the boolean is at endgame, and then so what we can do is we can actually make this work just like the is in menu variable. So when the actual program is drawn onto the screen, if we are at the endgame, instead of actually drawing the program and getting the program to do its thing, we instead want to simply draw the endgame screen. So this can be done in the draw method. So we're going to go ahead and jump, or in the paint method. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to the paint method, and as you can see, we have this certain thing where it says if is in menu, then we're drawing the menu, else, then we're drawing everything else. So what we want to do here is we want to make it so it says if is in menu, then we're going to draw the menu, else if is at endgame screen. No, wait, it's just is at endgame, my bad. Then we can go ahead and draw the endgame screen. And then we can go ahead and make a new method called drawEndgame. So we're going to say public void drawEndgame, and we're going to, of course, take in a graphics object. And then inside of this drawEndgame method, we're just going to go ahead and draw the endgame image. So I don't really want to go into Microsoft Paint and actually create a new endgame image that is similar to the menu. So I'm just going to go ahead and sort of create a rinky-dink one using our knowledge of actually creating images. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're just going to go ahead and create a new image here. So we're just going to go ahead and say buffered image endgame image equals new buffered image. And then we can go ahead and specify the width and the height. So the width is going to be this dot get preferred size dot width, and the height is going to be this dot get preferred size dot height. So it's the exact same size as our current applet. Now it's going to have us, of course, put in an image type. So I'm just going to say buffered image dot type int argb, which is, of course, classic RGB colors with alpha transparency support. Now that's the thing we've been using for all of our buffered images in this tutorial. So the next thing we need to do is we actually need to get the graphics of this endgame image so we can draw some text onto the screen. So now we're going to say graphics endgame graphics equals endgame image dot get graphics. So now what we're going to do, now that we have a new image and we actually have a new graphics, is we're simply going to use the new graphics to draw some text onto the screen. So we're actually going to, what we're going to need to do is on our endgame screen, we're actually going to need to keep track of whether the user lost or won. So we're going to go ahead and create one more variable that actually relates to our endgame, and we're going to make it say private boolean 1. And this is going to keep track of whether or not the user actually won. So right now we're just going to keep it equal to false, and so we're going to go ahead and say if won, then what we want to do is we want to say endgame graphics dot draw text, or draw string rather, and then we're going to go ahead and tell the user that they won. So we're going to go ahead and just say you spent too long playing this game, you won. And then so it's X position. We want this to actually be inside of the middle of the image. So we're going to go ahead and make its X position at this dot preferred size dot width divided by 2, and then its Y position is going to be this dot get preferred size dot height divided by 2. And it looks like I forgot to say get in front of preferred size there. So now that we actually draw the fact that they won, we can go ahead and say else. So if won, then we're going to go ahead and draw the string. You spent too long playing this game, but you won. Else, which means you lost, then we're going to go ahead and say endgame graphics dot draw string. You lost. Boo-hoo. And then we're going to go ahead and put this at the same location. So this dot get preferred size dot width divided by 2, and then this dot get preferred size dot height divided by 2. So keep in mind that this is going to draw either you won or you lost, depending on if the one variable is true or false. So after you actually oops, I put Endgame. So after we actually tell the user if they lost or won, then what we need to do is we're going to display their score. So then we're going to say Endgame graphics dot draw string your score. And then we're going to put a colon, and then we're just going to go ahead and tag on this dot score. And then the x variable is, of course, going to be the exact same as all the other x variables. So we're going to say this dot get preferred. I spelled preferred wrong. Preferred size dot width divided by 2, and then its y variable. I'm going to go ahead and set it under the other text we have. So we're just going to say this dot get preferred size dot height divided by 2 plus 10. And then, of course, we're going to put divided by 2 in parentheses just in case Java isn't able to handle order of operations, which it should be, but we're just going to make that to be sure. So what this is going to do is it's actually going to send it 10 pixels below the message that says they lost or won. And the next thing we're actually going to make this 20, give it a little room. And the final thing we're actually going to display is we're going to display a button that allows them to play again. So we're just going to go ahead and say endgame graphics dot draw string press space. We're just going to say space space. Okay. So if we want to actually put quotations into a string, then what we need to use is we actually need to use, I think it's called an escape code. And this can be done with the backslash character. And then if we type backslash and then an apostrophe, or not an apostrophe, a quotation mark, instead of actually ending our string, it will insert a apostrophe into our string. So we're just going to say press space to start a new game. And we're going to go ahead and put this at this dot get preferred, spelled preferred wrong again, size dot width divided by 2. And then we're going to put it at this dot get preferred size dot height divided by 2. And then we're going to go ahead and add 40 onto this one. So it's going to be 20 pixels below the score message and 40 pixels below the message on whether or not they won. So now that we actually have our draw endgame method complete, we can go ahead and pop this in. So instead of actually drawing everything else when the draw game method is called, if we're at the endgame, then we're going to go ahead and draw the endgame with the graphics G. Now, one thing we actually forgot to do is here we actually created an endgame image and then we drew everything onto the image, but we never actually painted the endgame image onto our screen. So we're going to go ahead now and say g.drawImage. And we're just going to draw the endgame image, so endgame image, and we're going to place it, of course, at 0, 0 with a image observer of this. Now, we don't actually need to specify the width and the height of the image because the width and the height of the image are already there. If you specify the width and the height of the image, that's useful for things like cropping. However, we don't actually want to crop the image we just made because it's the perfect size for our applet. So now we have a working endgame screen that will actually draw the endgame when the variable is at endgame is equal to true. So now if we actually scroll down to our move method and we find where we won, then we want to go ahead and say is at endgame equals true. And since we won, we also want to say 1 equals true. Now, because of the fact that is at endgame immediately may cause the menu to be painted, we're going to actually put 1 equals true before is at endgame. Now, here in all of the other methods where we actually end up resetting the game, what we want to do is we actually want to make it so after it checks the score, it displays the is at endgame screen. Now, since we actually lost at this point, we're going to say 1 equals false, and then we're going to say is at endgame equals true. And we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste this block of code and pop it into these different locations. So what's going to happen here is, excuse me, the generate default or the is at endgame equal to true variable is going to make it so the is at endgame screen is drawn. However, what we want to do is as soon as this is drawn, we don't want to make it generate the default snake right away. But as soon as the user presses that space bar, that's when we're going to want to make it generate the default snake. So we can go ahead and cut this out of this part of the code and delete it from these. And then here where it says we won, we're just going to want to do the classic check score. We forgot to do that. So even if they win, we're still checking the high score. And then we're going to return once we're done, because if we won, we don't want to add a new point. So now one of the final things that we actually need to do is manage the logic of the endgame screen. So if we actually go into our run method here, we see that what we have it repaint, and then we're going to say if not is in the menu, we're going to move. However, we also need to make it so it doesn't move if we're not, or if we're in the endgame screen. So we need to say if not is in menu and not is at endgame, then we're going to go ahead and actually move. So this is basically saying if we're not in the menu and if the game is not over, we're going to go ahead and move the snake. So now finally we're going to go ahead and go into our key pressed method, and we can go ahead and actually deal with when the spacebar is pressed. So we're going to go ahead and add one more case to our long list of cases, and we're going to say case key event .vk underscore space, and then add in a colon, and then we simply need to check if we're at the endgame screen. So we're going to say if is at endgame. Then what we're going to need to do, oh my goodness, I can't type today. So then what we're going to need to do is if they press space and they're at the endgame, then we're going to go ahead and say is at endgame equals false. 1 equals false, because if they ended up winning, we're going to go ahead and just set that equal to false because we need to reset everything. And then we're going to go ahead and generate the default snake. So this is just going to go ahead and reset the game. And then we're going to repaint. And then at the end of this if statement, we're going to break. So essentially, if they're at the end game and then they go ahead and press space, then they're going to go ahead and reset the one variable, generate the new snake, and then repaint. And since it sets is at end game rather equal to false, the game should reset. So let's go ahead and test this out. If we actually run the snake applet here and press OK, you can see that the game starts up as normal, and if we press enter, well, our snake seems to only be 1 block wide, or 1 block long. And we can actually address why that is in just a second. However, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead. We're actually going to go ahead and kill ourselves by crashing into this wall. And as you can see, it actually just goes to a blank image here. And I believe this is actually a problem with painting our image. Now, in order to actually test out if this is a problem with simply our image that we created, we can go ahead and press space. And as you can see, it actually does reset the game. And since it resets the game, we know that our is at endgame variable is working, and we're able to actually start a new game. So, what we're going to do is we're actually going to look into these 2 bugs that we just noticed. The first one being that if we lose, and then we press space, our default snake is actually only 1 block long. So let's go ahead and look into that one first. So, the first culprit would of course be the generate default snake method. But as you can see, the generate default snake method actually adds 3 new points. But for some reason, only 1 point is actually being added. So when the game actually starts, let's go ahead and check out what happens. So as you can see, once you press the enter key, we're going to go ahead and go to the key pressed. And once you press the enter key, we're going to set is in menu equal to false, and then we're going to repaint. Now what we do is, once this is done and is at menu equal to false, then what we're going to do is we're going to call the generate default snake method where snake equals null. And then we're going to go ahead and go on with the rest of our calculations. So if we're not in the menu and if we're not at the end game, then we're going to go ahead and generate the default snake. And then while we're moving, while we actually start our snake moving, you can see that when we actually go out of bounds, we just check the score, we check the score, and we check the score again. But the default snake is being generated as 1 block, which is rather interesting because this is something that I did not account for happening. So what we can do is we can go ahead and try to figure out why this is happening by eliminating some of our generate default snake calls. So we're going to go ahead and comment out our generate default snake call in the key pressed method. And as you can see, that was not it. Now what's interesting is you can actually see the snake kind of collapsing. So I don't know why that's happening. I believe that why that's happening, no. I'm not really sure why that's happening. Well, we can go ahead and look into our generate default snake method, and as you can see, it adds a new point at 0, 2, 0, 1, and 0, 0, and then it sets the direction equal to direction.no direction. Now, what if we actually eliminate one of these points? Let's just go ahead and eliminate actually the top two, and then we start the game. And you can see that actually the snake is drawn properly. Now let's go ahead and eliminate only one of them. And the snake collapses again. But why is that happening? I believe why this may be happening is this line right here. As you can see, what happens is it actually removes the last part of the snake. So what this does is it gets the head, and then it actually, depending on the direction, gets a new point where the head is, and then it removes the last part of the snake. But it doesn't actually check to see if the snake is moving before this point is removed. So let's go ahead and comment out this line and see if this actually solves the problem. And as you can see, it does, sort of. We can go ahead and add the snake back in. And as you can see, when we press enter, the snake is now not collapsing. So what the problem seems to be is even when the snake is not moving, it is actually removing part of the snake. So this can be solved by making sure that the snake is moving when we remove the tail. So we're going to say if direction, no. If this dot direction is not equal to direction dot no direction, then we're going to go ahead and remove the last part of the snake. And then if we go ahead and run the application and press enter, you can see that now everything works properly and the snake is no longer being deleted. However, there's still the bug that occurs that if we actually crash, the endgame screen is not being displayed properly. So let's go ahead and look into our draw endgame method here. And as you can see, it's going to go ahead and create an endgame image, and then it's going to go ahead and get the endgame graphics. And one of the things it may be doing is it may be drawing in white. So what we're going to do is we're going to say endgame graphics dot set color, and we're going to go ahead and say color dot black. And once we do that, and then we run the game, we can see if it's drawing the endgame image now. And as you can see, it is drawing the endgame image. So the problem was that it was actually drawing the endgame text in white. So it was there, we just couldn't see it. So now as you can see, it says you lost, boo-hoo, your score 0, press space to start a new game. So if we press space, now here's another problem that we didn't account for. So, or we didn't actually find out before. So now if we die and then we press space, it doesn't actually reset our snake, which is fairly interesting, because if you look into the generate default snake method, it sets score equal to 0, the snake clears, and then we add points back to it. So now if we go back into our key press method where we actually press space, this is because we actually commented out the generate default snake and we forgot to re-comment it back in, or re-uncomment it back in. Whoops! So now if we go ahead and run the snake applet, press enter, and actually play the game, you can see that we now have to press space to start a new game, and then once we do, it starts a new game right up. So we now have a working snake game with that seems to be free of bugs, with a menu, a pause functionality, an endgame screen, win conditions, fruit, a growing snake, beautiful looking images, not really, And that's pretty much it. Oh, and a high score. So it's pretty much a full-fledged snake game that that is working and that we created. So now that the endgame screen has been created, and as you can see, it's actually kind of problematic because it's a little off screen. But you know what? That's just the kind of ghetto-ness we're looking for on our project. As you can see, I kind of got lazy about it, but that's okay. So now we have a working endgame screen and a fully fledged snake project. In the next snake tutorials, I'm actually going to be uploading the snake game, or showing you how to upload the snake game to the web in the form of an applet. And we may actually further the snake tutorial series if you guys want. So go ahead and comment saying if you want this. If you guys want, we could actually add images, sounds, and improve graphics to our snake game. But right now, this will definitely do. So thanks for watching this tutorial. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Brandonio21. I've been recently active there. And if you really like this tutorial series, please remember to donate to me because I make these tutorials in my free time and, well, a little gas money never hurts. I don't have a car, but a little gas money never hurts. So thanks for watching these tutorials and have a great day. Peace.